The soft amber glow of Edison bulbs cast dancing shadows across the rich mahogany bar. The air was thick with the sweet, smoky aroma of aged whiskey and the gentle murmur of conversation. This was Barrel and Stone, one of the city's most exclusive whiskey bars, known for its intimate atmosphere and impressive collection of rare spirits. I had been looking forward to this night for weeks, an exclusive whiskey tasting event that promised to showcase some of the finest selections from around the world. As a whiskey enthusiast with a modest but growing knowledge, I was eager to expand my palate and perhaps make some connections with fellow aficionados. My name is Alex, and I've been cultivating my appreciation for whiskey since my 25th birthday, when my father gifted me a bottle of 18-year-old Macallan. That first sip was a revelation. The complex interplay of flavors, the warmth that spread through my chest, the lingering finish that seemed to tell a story all its own. Since then, I'd been on a journey of discovery, learning about different regions, distillation processes, and the subtle art of tasting. Tonight's event felt like another step in that journey, though I had no idea just how transformative it would be. I arrived early, wanting to soak in the atmosphere before the crowd arrived. The bartender, a woman with an impressive knowledge of whiskey and a friendly smile, chatted with me about the evening's lineup. "We've got some special pours tonight," she said with a knowing wink, "including a few that aren't on the regular menu." My anticipation grew as I watched her arrange crystal-tasting glasses in neat rows, each one waiting to cradle liquid gold. As other guests began to filter in, I found myself observing them with interest. There were the expected types: older gentlemen in tailored suits discussing business, a few groups of friends out for a special occasion, and several serious enthusiasts who, like me, had come alone to focus entirely on the experience. The room was filling up nicely when he walked in. He moved with a confident grace that immediately drew my attention. Tall, with dark hair that fell just so across his forehead, and eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. He wore a charcoal gray sweater over a crisp white shirt, casual yet undeniably elegant. When he smiled at the hostess, I noticed the slight crinkle around his eyes that suggested he smiled often and meant it. There was something magnetic about him, an energy that seemed to alter the very atmosphere of the room. I didn't realize I was staring until he caught my eye and held my gaze for just a moment longer than was casual. He offered a small nod of acknowledgement before making his way to the bar. I quickly looked down at my phone, pretending to be absorbed in something important, while my heart inexplicably beat a little faster. The event began with a welcome from the bar's owner, who introduced the evening's guide, a master distiller from Kentucky who would be leading us through the tasting. As luck would have it, the mysterious man ended up standing next to me as we gathered around the main tasting table. "Looks like we're tasting partners," he said, his voice a pleasant baritone with just a hint of roughness around the edges. "I'm Jake." "Alex," I replied, extending my hand. His grip was firm and warm, and I noticed a vintage watch on his wrist, the kind that spoke of appreciation for craftsmanship rather than flashy luxury. The first pour was a Highland Scotch, pale gold and delicate. The distiller instructed us on the proper way to nose the whiskey, approaching gently, parting our lips slightly to minimize the burn of alcohol and maximize the perception of aromas. I followed his instructions, closing my eyes to better concentrate on the scent of honey, heather, and a distant hint of sea salt. "What do you get from it?" Jake asked, his voice low enough that only I could hear. I described what I was experiencing, and he nodded appreciatively. "You've got a good nose," he said. Most people miss the maritime influence. There was no condescension in his tone, just genuine respect that made me stand a little taller. As we moved through the next few selections, a spicy rye from Canada, a surprisingly complex Japanese whiskey, and a rich Irish pot still, Jake and I fell into an easy rhythm of sharing observations. He clearly knew his spirits well, offering insights about production methods and historical context that enhanced my appreciation. Yet he listened to my thoughts with genuine interest, never making me feel like a novice despite his obviously superior knowledge. Between pours, we exchanged bits of personal information. He was a consultant for craft distilleries, helping them refine their processes and develop their products. I shared that I worked in architectural design, specializing in renovations of historic buildings. "So we both appreciate the value of time and patience in creating something beautiful," he observed, and the way he said it made it feel like more than casual conversation. The tasting progressed, and with each whiskey, the space between us seemed to decrease incrementally. I became hyper-aware of every accidental brush of shoulders, every moment when he leaned closer to speak into my ear over the growing hum of conversation around us. The whiskey was certainly warming my blood, but I knew it wasn't solely responsible for the pleasant heat that seemed to radiate from wherever our bodies made contact. About halfway through the evening, the distiller announced a special pour, a limited edition bourbon aged in port wine casks, with only 500 bottles released worldwide. "This," he said with reverence, "is something truly special." As the amber liquid was poured into our glasses, Jake's eyes met mine with a gleam of excitement that mirrored my own. We raised our glasses in the prescribed manner, examining the rich color against the light. Jake pointed out the reddish hues imparted by the port casks. "See how it clings to the glass?" he murmured. "That's what they call the legs or tiers. It tells you about the alcohol content and viscosity." I nodded, watching as the whiskey slowly made its way down the inside of the glass. When we moved to smell it, Jake demonstrated a technique I hadn't seen before, cupping his hand over the glass to trap the aromas before bringing it to his nose. I tried to mimic him, and he smiled at my attempt. "Here," he said, "let me show you." He moved behind me, his chest just barely touching my back as he guided my hand with his own. "Like this," he said, his breath warm against my ear. "Now close your eyes and tell me what you smell." With his proximity sending my senses into overdrive, I somehow managed to focus on the whiskey. "Vanilla," I said. "Dark cherries. Something like cinnamon or nutmeg. And leather." "Very good," he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "You're a natural." He stepped back, allowing me space to breathe again, though part of me missed his closeness immediately. When it came time to taste this special bourbon, the distiller instructed us to take just a small sip, letting it coat our tongues completely before swallowing. I followed his direction, closing my eyes to better concentrate on the explosion of flavors, the sweet vanilla and caramel notes from the oak, the fruity richness from the port, the underlying spice that tingled pleasantly. I was so absorbed in the experience that I didn't immediately notice Jake watching me intently. When I opened my eyes, the expression on his face had shifted from friendly appreciation to something more intense, more focused. There was a question in his eyes, and though no words were spoken, I felt myself responding to it with a slight nod that I wasn't entirely conscious of giving. As I raised the glass for a second sip, Jake's hand gently encircled my wrist. The unexpected contact sent a jolt through me, but I didn't pull away. With deliberate slowness, he guided the glass away from my lips, his eyes never leaving mine. The ambient noise of the room seemed to fade as he leaned in, closing the distance between us with purpose. "May I?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. My heart hammered in my chest as I managed a breathy yes. His lips replaced the glass, soft and warm against mine, tasting of the bourbon we'd just shared. The kiss was gentle at first, almost tentative, as if he was giving me every opportunity to pull away. But as I responded, leaning into him slightly, his free hand came up to cup my jaw, deepening the connection between us. It lasted only seconds, but when he pulled back, the world had somehow shifted on its axis. Around us, the tasting continued, but it felt as though we had stepped into a bubble where time moved differently. Jake's eyes searched mine, looking for any sign of regret or discomfort. Finding none, a slow smile spread across his face. "I've been wanting to do that since you described the notes in that first scotch," he admitted, his thumb gently stroking my cheek before he lowered his hand. I was momentarily speechless, caught between surprise at his boldness and acknowledgement of the tension that had been building between us all evening. "That's quite a tasting technique," I finally managed, a smile tugging at my lips. "Is that how the professionals do it?" He laughed, the sound rich and genuine. "Only with very special whiskeys," he replied, his eyes twinkling. "And very special tasting partners." The rest of the official event passed in a pleasant haze. We continued to participate in the tasting, offering our observations and listening to the distiller's expertise, but there was now an electric undercurrent to our interactions. Every glance, every accidental touch, every leaned-in comment carried additional weight and meaning. As the formal tasting concluded, and people began to mingle more freely. Jake suggested we move to a quieter corner to continue our conversation. We found a small table in a secluded alcove, partially hidden by a decorative barrel display. The bartender, perhaps sensing the connection between us, brought over 2 glasses of water and a special pour of something not on the evening's menu. "On the house," she said with a knowing smile. In this more private setting, our conversation deepened. Jake shared how he had come to the world of whiskey through his grandfather, who had worked at a distillery in Tennessee for 40 years. "He used to let me dip my finger in his glass when I was just a kid," Jake recalled. "Just enough to taste it. He said I made the most disgusted face, but I kept asking for more." His expression softened with the memory. When he passed, he left me his collection, nothing fancy or expensive, but bottles that told the story of his life. That's when I really fell in love with whiskey, not just the taste, but the history and meaning behind it. I told him about my own journey, how whiskey had become a way to connect with my father across the generational divide that sometimes made communication difficult. "We don't always know how to talk about important things," I explained, "but we can sit together with a good dram, and somehow the conversation flows more easily." As we talked, I learned that Jake's confidence masked vulnerabilities of his own. He had struggled to reconcile his professional success with personal disappointments, including a long-term relationship that had ended painfully the previous year. He couldn't understand why I would spend so much time on the road, visiting distilleries and meeting with producers, Jake explained. He saw it as me choosing my passion over our relationship, but it wasn't that simple. The casual mention of his ex-boyfriend answered a question I hadn't directly asked but had been wondering about since our kiss. It also gave me the courage to share more of my own story, my somewhat late realization about my sexuality in college, my cautious exploration of relationships, and the challenges of navigating the dating world as someone who preferred meaningful connections over casual encounters. "I've never actually kissed someone at a whiskey tasting before," I admitted with a small laugh. "That's definitely a first." Jake's expression grew more serious. "I hope I didn't overstep. I don't usually act so impulsively, but there was something about the way you were experiencing everything so genuinely, so completely present in each moment." He trailed off, looking slightly embarrassed. "It was irresistible. I'm glad you didn't resist," I said quietly, surprising myself with my boldness. His eyes darkened slightly at my words, and he reached across the table to take my hand. "Would you think I'm being too forward if I suggested we continue this conversation somewhere more private? My apartment is just a few blocks from here." The question hung between us, laden with possibility. I considered it carefully, not wanting to rush into something purely on the wings of whiskey and attraction, no matter how strong both might be. "I'd like to get to know you better," I said honestly. "But maybe we could start with coffee tomorrow, when we're both completely clear-headed and can be sure this isn't just the bourbon talking." Rather than being disappointed, Jake's expression filled with respect and what looked like relief. "I'd like that even more," he said, squeezing my hand gently. "Though I should tell you, I'm completely clear-headed right now. Professional habit. I never drink enough at these events to cloud my judgment." "Is that so?" I raised an eyebrow, feeling a surge of confidence. "In that case, maybe we could compromise. There's a late-night cafe near here that makes excellent coffee. We could continue our conversation there and see where the night takes us. No pressure, no expectations." Jake's smile was answer enough, but he added, "That sounds perfect." As we prepared to leave, gathering our coats and settling our tabs, Jake paused. "One more thing before we go," he said, a playful glint in his eye. He signaled to the bartender, who brought over 2 small glasses of amber liquid. "What's this?" I asked, curious. "The whiskey I helped develop for a small distillery in Colorado last year," he explained. "It just won a gold medal at the San Francisco World Spirits Competition. I want to share it with you properly." He raised his glass, and I mirrored him. But instead of the traditional toast, he leaned in and kissed me again, more confidently this time. When he pulled back, he whispered, "Now taste it." I took a sip, and the whiskey seemed to explode with flavor on my palate. Notes of honeyed apple, toasted oak, and a hint of dark chocolate, all enhanced somehow by the lingering sensation of his kiss. "What do you think?" he asked, watching me intently. "I think," I replied slowly, savoring both the whiskey and the moment, "that this might be the beginning of my favorite tasting experience yet." As we left the bar together, stepping into the cool night air with the promise of coffee and conversation ahead. I couldn't help but reflect on how an evening that had begun as a simple whiskey tasting had transformed into something far more intoxicating. Sometimes the most unexpected pairings create the most memorable experiences, whether in whiskey or in life. The cafe was nearly empty when we arrived, just a few night owls typing on laptops and a couple engaged in hushed conversation in the corner. We ordered our coffees, an Americano for him, a latte for me, and found a comfortable couch near the window where we could watch the occasional car pass by on the rain-slicked street. Our conversation flowed as easily as it had at the bar, but with a new layer of openness now that certain barriers had been crossed. Jake told me about growing up in a small town in Kentucky, where his interest in whiskey had made him something of an oddity among peers more interested in beer. I shared stories of my college years studying architecture, discovering my passion for preserving historical elements while adapting spaces for modern use. As the night deepened, so did our connection. What had begun as attraction fueled by whiskey and atmosphere was revealing itself to be something potentially more substantial, a genuine compatibility of minds and spirits that transcended the circumstances of our meeting. When the cafe finally announced last call, we reluctantly acknowledged that the night was coming to an end. Standing on the sidewalk outside, neither of us quite ready to say goodbye, Jake took my hand. "I have a tasting event in Chicago this weekend," he said, "but I'll be back on Monday. Would you have dinner with me then? A proper date." The word date sent a pleasant thrill through me. "I'd like that very much," I replied. He smiled, that same smile that had caught my attention hours earlier, but now familiar in a way that felt significant. "Until Monday, then," he said, leaning in for one last kiss, gentle but full of promise. As I watched him walk away, I couldn't help but think how the best whiskeys reveal their character slowly, layer by layer, with patience and attention. The same, perhaps, could be said for the best relationships. What had begun with a glass taken from my lips and replaced with his might just develop into something as complex, rich, and rewarding as the finest aged spirit, something worth savoring for a very long time. Total _char_count, 17,981.